let's go ahead and knock this out, shall we? My shelves look really bare right now because I've taken everything down, like all the Christmas decorations, all the little knickknack figurines I've got, except for like my Reading Rush mug and my cat tea diffuser. Um, because I'm going to do an unhaul in the next like 2 days, and so I need to have everything off the shelf. Um, so that's why it looks kind of dull in here. But anyway, this is the best and worst books that I read in 2019. I had to go back through Goodreads and actually look at what I read because I couldn't remember. You know, I'll look on my shelf and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah, but you read that last year. Or things I read in like December of 2018, like The Diviners, I've completely forgotten I read in 2018. So I had to make myself a cheat sheet of my favorites. And the good news is my worst list is very small. And I only own a physical copy of one of them. So this whole stack is the best books. So let's go ahead and just jump into those real quick and talk about the best books I read in 2019. So I wrote them on my cheat sheet in order of when I read them. And then again, some of them I don't have, or some of them are on my Kindle. So we're just going to go through this stack here and just try to keep track of everything. So the first thing on my list is The Scarlet Pimpernel by Baroness Orsezi, I feel like is how you're going to pronounce it, which is like the original Masked Hero Vigilante book. It's like, I read it on my Kindle, and I had seen like the old black and white movie before, and I really loved it, and I just loved like the mistaken identity thing. And the whole plot of this is there's this masked hero that's saving people from the guillotine in France, and they just can't find the Scarlet Pimpernel. He leaves a little flower drawing whenever he goes, and it follows this woman who is like a fashion icon who comes from France. She lives in England now with her husband, who she just cannot stand. He isn't who she married, and some circumstances arise where maybe her husband isn't who she thinks she is, and just the plot and the pacing for this being as old as it is was so fun to read. Like, I ended up kind of putting off homework to finish it, even though it was my like walk to the bus book. I would like keep reading it when I wasn't supposed to. And again, for the timing it was really good. It's a series. I think there are more Scarlet Pimpernel books, but I will not be reading them just because I don't want to get up into that series. This was a good standalone for me, and I found this cover at like the thrift shop. Like, I have it on my Kindle for free. You can just get it for free. But like, this is such a 70s cover of it, and it is very, very good. I recommend it if you like, you know, mistaken identities or someone knowing who someone is and the other one doesn't yet. It's just, oh, it's so good. The love story in there is really, really good, along with the drama. But yeah, so that one was The Scarlet Pimpernel. I'm not going fast enough. The next one was Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. This was hilarious. I've owned this book for like, it's been quite a while. But I bought it like on a whim. It was like $7. I'm like, yeah, I'll get that. I didn't realize there's two covers that, like, this has Azrael on it, but you can get one with Crowley that's black, and I think I need both of them now. But this was such a good book. Like, all the characters are fun. It's so snappy and hilarious, but it's also got a lot of good heart, and it has a good message. I love the characters in this. I have not seen the show yet, but I keep meaning to get around to doing that because I love David Tennant and Michael Sheen, so it can't let me down. But I read that one and loved that one. The next one in my stack, these are in like size order, I actually just finished it in time for Christmas, and it is The Afterlife of Holly Chase, which is kind of a retelling of Christmas Carol, where like this girl fails to be redeemed at the end of her Scrooge visit, and so she has to work for Project Scrooge and help other Scrooges, and she's technically dead. She's a ghost. She's a ghost of Christmas past, and there's like a love story, but it's really her redemption arc, and I cried at the end of this book, and I will probably read it again next Christmas because this is such a nice Christmassy story, and I just love Christmas Carol, and I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff. And every time there are lines in here that are like dialogue straight from like The Grinch and from the original Christmas Carol, and it was so nice and heartwarming, so I really enjoyed this one. The next book was Elizabeth Acevedo's With the Fire on High. I do not need to tell you what this book is about because you can find a billion reviews of this book because everyone loved this book this year. I love this book this year. I don't read a lot of young adult contemporaries, and I felt this one was really good. You felt the pressure that she felt as a young teen mom, but she still wanted to achieve her dreams. And just the romance was really cute and believable, and I I don't know. I just really liked this world where things are still kind of realistic and hard, but you can have a happy ending. And it's really nice when that happens. I think I'm gonna have to make the recipes in here though. There's like 3 or 4 of them, I think. And this cover is gorgeous. The underbook cover is gorgeous. I just love this book. It was a really fun read, like from one week this summer. The next book is one I just finished and just got a hardcover of, and it's The Guinevere Deception. I really love this retelling of King Arthur. I think I go into this more in an ARC video I'm going to post, and you can find other people's reviews of this, and they've done reading blogs on it. I think it's like Boston Reads Books did a pretty like in-depth review of it, and she really loved it. But this is a really good retelling of the King Arthur tales from the point of view of Guinevere, who was a changeling. I like fantasy that gives me a kind of hardcore magic system and gives me good characters to follow, and that is what this one does. So the Guinevere Deception is definitely a favorite. The next one that I have a physical copy of that I don't have a jacket on because it has a huge slit down it because it came from the scratch and dent section of Book Outlet, but I also own it on Kindle, is A Curse So Dark and Lonely. And this has got some like mixed feedback. Some people really like it, some people really don't. I really like it. Again, I'm a big fan of fantasy when it's like got good characters in it and it's got a good plot. I really liked all the characters in here. Gray is my baby, and I cannot wait for A Heart So Fierce and Broken. I'm sure it's going to make me really anticipate the third book that doesn't exist yet, but here we are. But anyway, this book was really good. I need to reread it because it's been a couple months now. I read it for the Reading Rush back in July. So I just really enjoy this whole like mix of reality and fantasy. It isn't a pure fantasy. It involves a girl named Harper going back from Washington, D.C. in our present time to some kind of weird alternate fantasy world where Prince Rin is basically the beast in this, and he's a human, and then he turns into a beast for one day on his birthday and like destroys everything. So he has to break the curse, and if he doesn't break the curse, he's gonna die. He's just, no, I'm not gonna do it anymore. And so it's kind of their love story, but also there's Grays there, and you know, but she's like, no, you need to be able to rule this country. Why aren't you interacting with your people? You need to be a king if your dad isn't here. And it's just so good. I just really enjoy it. I can't wait to read the sequel this upcoming year. It's one of my more anticipated ones. But that was A Curse So Dark and Lonely. The next ones I'm going to have to read off the sheet of paper because I either borrowed them, loaned them out from the library, or they're on my Kindle. So the first one on that list is Crazy Rich Asians. I went to go see that last fall, the movie, and I just had to read it. And one of my friends owns the trilogy and let me borrow the first book, and it's so good. Like, I can just say, if you liked the movie even a little bit, you need to read the book because there's so much more to do with these characters than you think, and you end up liking some of the side characters much more than the main ones. Like, of course I love the main characters, but I just love the snappiness of stuff, and people were so like rude to each other. It was just, it's like watching just this most brutal soap opera. And the sequel was really good too, and again, it expands on characters that you didn't get to see a lot of in the movie. I have not read the third one yet because she's still reading it, but when she's finished, she's going to loan it to me, and I'm sure I'll like the whole trilogy. But I definitely like the first one, I think, better than the second one, but they're both really good. They both should be read, definitely. But that is Crazy Rich Asians by Kevin Kwan. The next book that I borrowed is the second book in the Diviner series, Lair of Dreams by Libba Bray. It was a really hard choice between that one and Before the Devil Breaks You. I read both of those in 2018, and I love both of them. I love that series. But I think Lair of Dreams was better for me because it doesn't feel like a closing. Like, it feels like a more of a continuation of what these kids are going through. And so the first one sets up the characters. The second one introduces a few more and just does more with them. And I really enjoyed that. The stakes weren't like super high, but they still were. This is a very like realistic horror kind of sci-fi fantasy alternate history book. I don't know how to describe the Diviner series. But I thought it was really nice. I really liked hearing as much as I did from Ling and Henry's point of view. I cried near the end, and if you've read it, you probably know why I cried. And if I read it again, I would probably cry again. It was really good. Now, Before the Devil Breaks You also made me cry, but that one also hurt my feelings, so that's why it's not on this list, because it hurt my feelings way too much to be on this list. But that was one of the best books I read, was Lair of Dreams by Libba Bray. The next one that I don't have a physical copy of is The Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. And I read that one for I did like a mini challenge before the August Owl Crate, which is my first Owl Crate I got. And it was a reread because it was one of the first books I bought on my Kindle. And I remember that I loved it. And I will probably reread it again in the future because I just love the vibe of that book. It's about horses and sort of Irish folklore, and it's on an island, and everybody's in sweaters and scarves. And then I mentioned there are horses, and it's in like October. I love it. And it feels like that. The writing feels like that. This was such a good book. And I know it's not like a new release, but like, and it's been around a while. But my God, it's such a good book. And I cried at the end of it, but I cry over everything. So what we should learn from this is it doesn't really matter if I cry. That doesn't make it the best book. But honestly, if I cry, it helps to make it the best book. Anyway, The Scorpio Races is on this list. The next book that's on my list of favorites was borrowed from a school library, and I read it for Spookathon, and it was Confessions by, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, Kanae Minato, and it is wild. It's like a thriller. It's about a teacher who's like, her daughter got killed. She doesn't know why her daughter got killed. And she kind of figures it out right before the end of the school year, and she exacts revenge. Except that's not the full revenge, and you have the rest of the book to watch things turn from bad to worse. It gets crazy. And now really, you don't know what's going to happen. It's almost told like short stories from different characters' point of view. And I did not understand what was going to happen until the very last page. And as soon as I read that last page, I think my jaw like physically dropped. I was not ready. In my book, that's a good book because I was able to hold my attention for like 24 hours. It's a really good thriller. The next book on my list, and I think this is actually the last book on my best list, was Stalking Jack the Ripper. It took me way too long to finish it. It took me like months to finish it, but to my credit, I started it right before school started, so I just didn't have time. But I really enjoyed it. I thought the characters were really cool. I think that our main character was Audrey Rose. She was futuristic enough in her beliefs, but not unrealistic for the time. You know, she was very into science and like what women can do. And so some of the things she said may have come across a little bit too like progressive for the time period, but it never did. It always felt really realistic to me, and I was like interested in her and Thomas's relationship, and you know, her interest and her kind of conflicting interest on what she studies and like how feminine she is. And I'm ready to read more about these folks. I need to read the rest of the series, but it'll probably have to wait till summer because I just don't have the time to devote to it. But I really did like Stalking Jack the Ripper. So we come to the worst books. There are only 3 on this list. 2 are on my Kindle. There are plenty of books that I read that weren't like bad, but they weren't exactly good. Most of those are ones I read for school. If I was putting those on the list, it would be Voice at the Back Door by Elizabeth Spencer and Nervous Conditions by Tsitsi Dangarembga. I just didn't like them, but that doesn't mean they were bad. You know, they weren't awful. I wouldn't not recommend those books. I recommend those books. It's just you have to know the audience. But these books, I don't recommend to anybody. And that's a little harsh for one of them, but you'll see why when I get to it. The first book on here, and 2 of these I'm not going to go into detail with because I'm actually going to film a video about these 2 books because of the nature of them and how disappointed I was. This book was one of the first books I bought in January. It was one of the first books I read in January, and it is a gorgeous cover, and it's a retelling of my favorite Shakespeare play. It is Illyria by Elizabeth Hand. Look at that cover. That is a pretty cover, and it is a gorgeous dark green with silver writing, and it's little. I finished it in a day. You'd think this had the makings of being one of my favorite books, and it was awful. It was terrible. It was about a girl who loves her cousin, and that's not immediately enough to turn me off because I've read Game of Thrones. I've seen some weird stuff before, but it went nowhere. This book read like a memoir of like a 70-year-old lady, and nothing happened. You kept thinking, oh, this will happen, and then no, it doesn't. And it just lets you down, and it's disappointing, and no one ends up happy in this book, and it was bad. It was just a bad book. I am giving it away. I'm going to talk about it more in another video, but this was a bad book. It was the worst book I read. Anyway, moving on to the other book that let me down. The Shakespeare retelling of King Lear from the perspective of his daughter Cordelia. It is Cordelia Lionheart by Ron Fritsch. Ron Fritsch, never write a Shakespeare retelling ever again. This was a terrible retelling. You cannot write in the voice of a teenage girl. Never try it again. Do not attempt to write in the voice of a teenage girl ever again. This was so bad. Like, it was so bad. I finished it because it was a train wreck, because I could not believe the writing was happening like it was. It was atrocious writing. I don't know what 16-year-old-ish girl he's talked to before. They do not speak and act like this. Even like in the King Lear space, they wouldn't speak and act like this. And it was just the most unbelievable plot points. And the characters were out of character. And I am offended that I had to read it, that I had to spend money to read it. I thought it was gonna be good, and it wasn't. Don't read Cordelia Lionheart. I'm going to talk more about those in a different video. They let me down, though. They made me mad. They were the worst books. The third one is only on here because I felt like I needed to have 3, and it's Mayhem by Estelle Laurie. It has not come out yet. It comes out next year. I don't necessarily recommend it unless you're like a middle grade reader. You may enjoy it. It's supposed to be a retelling of like The Craft and Lost Boys. It takes place in a beach in California, and the women of this family have some weird magical powers that are never expanded on. There's Insta love that's expanded on, but it makes no sense. And I just don't like it. I just didn't like it. Characters were all stereotypes. I wrote a Goodreads a review about it, and I go into depth about it, but I just don't recommend it. It was one of the worst books that I read. I felt like it was a waste of time, but since it was an arc, I had to finish it. Like, it felt right to finish it. But I would not recommend it to anybody, again, unless you're like middle grade and you like that kind of stuff. But those were the worst books. And I don't enjoy that 2 of them were Shakespeare retellings. I like to read Shakespeare retellings, and I'm going to give like this stack of them, and plus more that I've got, a chance in the new year, and maybe somebody can redeem themselves, because those 2 books, Illyria and Cordelia Lionheart, were very, very bad. Do not read them. So I hope you enjoyed this. I got a little ranty there at the end, and I've worked myself up from my throat, and you know, I'm sick and stuff, so I'm all like in a tizzy now. But those were the best books. Pay attention to those. Go read those if you haven't. They were really, really good. And hopefully I will have another pile next year to say were my best. I didn't limit myself to like 10 or 12. I just looked through there and I was like, yeah, that's a favorite. And there probably could have been more on that list. But again, these were the ones that really struck me as like, yes, I did like that. Also, while I was checking, I only read 1 Stephen King book the whole year. That is disappointing. Like, I started The Shining, but I didn't finish it. This has been a tangent. Anyway,